Yo, what's going on, folks? Phillip Godfrey here. Welcome to Midweek Study Hall. For all of my returners, welcome back. If you're new here, my name is Phillip Godfrey, and this is Midweek Study Hall. Midweek Study Hall is where we gather and we build and study the scriptures off of the text in Matthew 6:33, where the Bible tells us to seek ye first the kingdom of the Father and his righteousness, and all things shall be added unto you. So through Midweek Study Hall and also weekly Bible study on Sundays, we gather to see, seek, and serve the kingdom of the Father. All right. And so, if it's your first time here or if you're returning, I just want to make sure we're all on the same page. We are continuing a study series right now called From Recreation to Revelation, From Creation to Revelation, where we are intentionally walking through the text from Genesis to Revelation this year. And today we are going to be starting First Chronicles. All right, First Chronicles, and we're going to be looking at chapters 1 through 9. I know that this is a change from what I told you guys Sunday night, but we'll be looking at chapters 1 through 9 because it just makes a little bit more sense. And it'll be pretty quick because chapters 1 through 9 are a lot of just the same, but we'll talk about that in a second. Okay, and so let's jump right in. As always, whenever we start a new chapter of the Bible, I try to give you a background on the book on the book, and just try to make sure that there's a little bit more understanding as to what is going on. And so, First and Second Chronicles were originally one book, similar to how First and Second Kings were originally one book. And so we'll be looking at them kind of as one book, but First and Second Chronicles, they were written sometime after Judah began to return back from the Babylonian exile. And so we looked at the end of Second Kings how Israel and Judah, they both went into captivity due to the decisions and the actions that they had made. And so now we see in First Chronicles and Second Chronicles, we will begin to see the nation of Judah beginning to return back into the promised land from Babylonian exile. And so it primarily, First and Second Chronicles primarily focus on the history of Judah, the southern kingdom is of the divided Israel that we've talked about previously. It focuses mostly on Judah, and it goes into a greater emphasis on David and Solomon as we look at like through the genealogies and all of those different types of things. And as we look at First and Chronicles tonight, really as we or today, as we look at First Chronicles, what we will see is during this time, the writer, who we don't know who the writer is, the writer is writing to the people of Judah and trying to really breathe life back into them and breathe renewal back into them, because even though they had come out of exile, they still had continued to act as if they were in exile. And so First and Second Chronicles are really written to promote their spiritual and also social renewal in their lives and in the season that they are in, because they are no longer in that place of exile and they need to be reminded of who they are. They need to be reminded of the goodness of the Father, where they had come from, and they also needed to be reminded of the covenants and the statutes and the judgments and the laws and all those things and that the Father had given to them, especially through the leadership of David and his relationship with David. So the book of First and Second Chronicles really focus heavily on David and his reign and the history around that. And then as we get over into Second Chronicles, we'll see more of all the leaders of Judah, but it will primarily focus on Judah as a nation. So let's go ahead and jump into this. All right. So chapter 1, and this will be it's going to be pretty quick, just because of kind of where we are in the Bible, and these first 9 chapters or so that we're looking at really focus on the background. They focus on the genealogies, a lot of lineage, a lot of like this person begot this person was the father of this person, and all of that. But the reason that is giving us so much history and so much genealogy is because the writer is trying to get Israel in Judah and trying to get these descendants to see themselves as the people that God had chosen from the beginning. And so the book of First Chronicles in chapter 1 starts by giving a genealogy of Adam. It goes from Adam all the way to Adam's descendants down to Abraham, and it goes to Abraham's descendants and to Esau, and I mean to Isaac, and then Esau, and to Israel and Jacob. And so it's really showing the tribes of Israel, the descendants of Jacob, that hey, your bloodline, the bloodline that the Father has chosen, traces all the way back to Adam in the garden, the first man that the Father had made. And so he's really encouraging the people of the Judah with these genealogies. So even though we're reading it and we're like, oh man, this is boring. Who cares that this person begot this person? There's still a lot of lessons that we can take from the lineage, or you see that in the title. There's a lot of lessons that we can take from these first few passages as well. So please go back and read them on your own time and get down deep into who is who, and whose descendants are who, and whose uncle is who, and all those different types of things. But chapter 1, it gives us the genealogy and the lineage and the descendants of Adam. It goes from Adam to Abraham, and then Abraham to his descendants, Isaac, and then Esau and Israel. And then it goes on to break down Abraham's genealogy as well. And it goes down from Abraham into Israel, and then down to Esau and the dukes of Edom, the kings and dukes of Edom. And so a duke was similar to what we saw towards the end of Second Kings, where we saw that governors were coming into play. And so when they were taken into Babylonian captivity, the people of Judah, were the Jews, when they were taken into Babylonian captivity, he didn't give them a king to be ruler over them, the people he left in the city. No, he gave them a governor. All right, so a governor was a little lower than a king. They were a ruler over a territory, or like a chief of that area, et cetera, very similar to how a governor would operate here in America as well. Let's look at verse 43 of chapter 1, and I'm reading from the King James Version. Now these are the kings that reigned in the land of Edom before any king reigned over the children of Israel. Bela the son of Beor, and the name of the city was Dinhaba. The reason I really pulled this verse out is because I wanted us to see, we talked about it previously, but I want you to see that the Bible here is confirming itself and is continuing to do just that. But it see here that there were kings who already reigned outside of the nation of Israel and outside of the nation of Judah before they were ever given kings. And so we see here that Edom, the land of Edom, Edom is, even though it's a descendant of Isaac, Edom is Esau, even though they're descendants of Isaac, they were not the ones with whom the promise was given. The promise was given, the birthright was given to Jacob. All right. And so the father ultimately chose Jacob and his descendants to make that covenant with. And so the Edomites here are already operating in a leadership structure that the father had not instituted for his people in that way. And so when we see Israel rise up and say, hey, we don't want the father to be our king, we want kings like everyone else around us, this is an example that it was happening around them. It just corroborates the story. Hopefully that makes sense for you. So as we move into chapter 2, what we see here is it gives us the descendants and the genealogy of the 12 sons, tribes of Jacob, Israel. All right, so it gives us the genealogy of these sons, starting with Judah. All right, so it starts with Judah first and his descendants. In chapter 3, we see the descendants of David and Solomon in the genealogy and in the lineage as well, and they would fall under the descendants of Judah as well. And then chapter 4, as we move into chapter 4, it begins by continuing to talk about more descendants, additional descendants of Judah. But it finishes by giving us the genealogy of Simeon. So it is these first 9 chapters are going to go through all 12 sons and their descendants, and really speaking, again, like I said at the beginning, really speaking to the people of Judah and really kind of reaffirming them and who they are ancestrally as they come out of this captivity and exile to the Babylonians. So it finishes, the chapter 4 finishes by giving us the genealogy of Simeon. But in the midst of all of this that's going on in the chapter, there's an interesting break in the genealogy, and it introduces us to a man named Jabez. All right. And this is where we get the prayer of Jabez from. I don't want you to just say the prayer. I want you to know where it is and know what the purpose of it is. So let's look at 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. Okay. Verses 9 and 10. And Jabez was more honorable than his brethren, and his mother called his name Jabez, saying, because she bare him with sorrow. And Jabez called on the Lord, on the God of Israel, saying, oh, that thou wouldest bless me indeed, and enlarge my coast, and that thine hand might be with me, and that thou wouldest keepest me from evil, that it may not grieve me. And the text goes on to say, and God granted him that which he requested. And I've seen people, say this prayer and all these things. I think it's a fantastic prayer to pray. And we see here that the Father granted him those things that he requested, and we can stand on this as well. But I want you to just see it in the text as well, okay? So after this, as the chapter ends, what we see is that even through the lineage and the genealogies, the writers were still, and the Father, the Holy Spirit divinely, is still encouraging the people by giving them these little nuggets. All right. So if we look at First Chronicles chapter 4, verses 22 and 23, what we see here is it says, and Jocham the man of Chozeba, and Joash and Saraph, and who had the dominion in Moab, and Jeshubalim, and these are ancient things. So what it was saying was these records that they were presenting had been anciently ratified. They had been ratified by ancient records or ancient documents to show that they are true. And then the text goes on to say in verse 23 that these were the potters, and those that dwelt among plants and hedges, there they dwelt with the kings for his work. So now, even in the lineage and even in showing them who they were and how the Father had chosen them even from the garden, and divinely orchestrated their lives and their positioning in the earth, we see here that he's even revealing to them who they are ancestrally and at the core, who they are, who their bloodline has been. And we see here when it says that these are the potters, that's what that bloodline was known for. That bloodline was known for being potters. And as we move throughout the rest of the chapters, you'll see that it say these are archers, or these are mighty men of valor, and different things. Like, that's what a bloodline meant. And that's what a lineage and having descendants meant, is that you were passing down the gifts and talents and callings that the Father has placed on your life onto your children, and then them onto their children, to the third, fourth, fifth, sixth, and seventh generation. This is important because the Father is a generational Father. He's not just thinking about you. And so as we give the Father our yes, we must understand that our yes is for us, but it's also for our children and our grandchildren and our great grandchildren. And I'm not saying that all of your children will do what the Father has called you to do. No, but there will be a remnant, there will be a legacy that will pass through from your assignment into the assignment of your children, or at least one of your children in your family, because that's how the Father works. And if you're the first one, this is what I believe, if you're the first one to say yes, I believe we see this in the story of Abram as well. If you're the first one to say yes, then there are people ahead of you, before you, and your ancestors who said no, and you're saying yes for that entire bloodline. Not only the folks that follow you, but the folks that have gone on before you that didn't follow the path. And so our yes is very important, because the Father isn't just trying to get something to us. He's trying to do something generationally. And I believe we see that in the text kind of corroborates that, affirms that as we move through this lineage. So there's even lessons in I'm loving the lineage. I'm loving the genealogy. Let's move into chapter 5. Chapter 5 gives us Reuben's genealogy. So far, I think we've looked at it showed us Judah, it showed us Simeon, and now we see Reuben. Reuben's genealogy. Reuben was the oldest son of Jacob, but he didn't get the birthright because he slept with his father's one of his father's wives or concubines or something like that. So it gives us Reuben's genealogy, and then it introduces us to the descendants of Gad as well, which is another tribe. It also talks about when we were looking through First and Second Kings, and we saw that Jotham and Jeroboam, who were the kings of Judah and Israel, at the time, they were doing censuses in the land. And even though those censuses, they were ultimately punished for doing that because it was wrong, they were not supposed to do it. Those census, that data from that census was even used and ultimately used to assist and validate the bloodline of the Israelites after they came out of exile. So we see through that nothing is wasted, even though Jotham and Jeroboam did that and just in disobedience, or they did it, without consulting the Father, out of the will of the Father, I guess is what I'll say. We can still see that it was used to ultimately uplift and confirm and affirm these Israelites, these Hebrews who were struggling potentially with their positioning and their stature after being in exile for such a period of time and coming out of that and trying to reintegrate into the things of the Father and into the promise. Hopefully that makes sense what I'm saying there. Let's look at verses 17 and 18. And these will confirm what I just told you because I don't want you to believe me. I want you to believe what the Father's word says. All right, verse 17. All these were reckoned by genealogies in the days of Jotham, king of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, king of Israel. So what it's saying is that all the things that they had told us up until this point were reconciled back to the original document or back to documents that were taken during those censuses. Verse 18, the sons of Reuben and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh, of valiant men, men able to bear buckler and sword and to shoot with the bow and skillful in war. So we see this, that they are mighty men of war. And there were 44,760 of those that went out to war. We also see here that Reuben, Gad, and the half tribe of Manasseh, these were those who took their inheritance on the other side of the river Jordan, back when we were looking at Moses in Deuteronomy, I believe. Let's move into chapter 6. Chapter 6 talks to us about the descendants of Levi and Aaron. Levi is the son of Judah. The son of Jacob. So it gives us the descendants of Levi, and then it tells us about Aaron and the priest and the line of priests and all that. It also introduces us to those who were designated as musicians in the house of the Father by David. When the ark was placed there. Chapter 7 goes on to tell us about the descendants of Issachar, Benjamin, Naphtali, Manasseh, Ephraim, and Asher. All right. And then chapter 8, as we move into chapter 8, it gives us more details about the descendants of Benjamin. And it ultimately gives us more information about the family of Saul. And it does a deep dive on Saul's background. I believe the reason it does a deep dive on Saul's background and it's also done a deep dive on David's background in the previous chapters is because the book of First and Second Chronicles. They're going to focus very heavily on David and his reign, especially in First Chronicles. And to do that, it starts off in chapter 10 talking about Saul. So it gives us a little background on his genealogy, his ancestors, and his descendants, so that we can see kind of pre-shadow or foreshadow preview his death, as it's going to show us in chapter 10, and then moving into David as the king. All right, let's move into chapter 9 and we'll finish up. So chapter 9 is where it begins to pivot. So the first 8 chapters, chapters 1 through 8, what we saw there were genealogies. It's really, showing the people of Judah who they were and tracing that back all the way to the garden, and then affirming them and reaffirming them in the fact that the Father has chosen you all for this position in his plan from the beginning. All right, and from Adam, from the garden, from the inception of all these things. And we see that from Adam down through the line through Noah, then down through Shem, and all through Abram and all the things. He's distinctly chosen you to be his people, and we see that through the genealogies. So in chapter 9, it tells us that the people during this period of time, they were returning back from exile and then settling in the territories that their ancestors had previously inhabited. So now they're returning from exile and settling again in the cities of Jerusalem and settling again in the promised land. And so let's look at that in First Chronicles 9, verses 1 through 3. And I'm reading this from the New Living Translation. All right. So all Israel was listed in the genealogical records in the book of the kings of Israel. The people of Judah were exiled to Babylon because they were unfaithful to the Lord. We talked about that on Sunday. The first of the exiles to return to their property in their former town were priests, Levites, temple servants, and other Israelites. Some of the people from the tribes of Judah, Benjamin, Ephraim, Manasseh came and settled in Jerusalem. So now we see that now the people of Judah are beginning to come out of exile. They're leaving that place. It says the Levites and people from all these tribes, they were leaving and coming back and settling in the land of promise, and also in the city of Jerusalem, or the territory of Jerusalem. All right. And so we see there that everything that they had told us about everything, all these genealogical records and everything, they had been reconciled to the records that they had kept in this book. The book of the kings of Israel is what the book of the kings of Israel and Judah is what the King James version calls it. All right. And so chapter 9 ends again by telling us about Saul's bloodline. And I told you guys why I believe it does that. But as we'll move into chapter 10 on Sunday. And the reason that I didn't keep chapter 10 into tonight is because chapter 10 is going to pivot, and we're going to kind of go back and look at David and David's reign, Saul's death, and then David and David's reign, and all those things, the covenant that the father made with David. And we're going to move throughout all of that. All right. And so that's what I got for you guys tonight. A lot of lineage, a lot of descendants, a lot of genealogies, but there's still lessons in these things. Even throughout all that, the father was affirming them. The father was telling them who they are. He was telling them he was reminding them of the positioning that he'd given them, and even ultimately how he had orchestrated that thing for the entirety of civilization up until that point. And he was doing the same thing for us, even though it might not always feel like it. These was a people who had just come out of exile, had come out of captivity. They probably didn't feel like they had been chosen of the Father. But as we're going through this, and as he's the writers telling them about themselves, they can see, and we can see, that the Father is divinely orchestrating every area of this thing. And the same thing is true for your life and my life as well. Even though right now it might not feel, you might be coming out of exile, you might be coming out of a season of captivity, and it doesn't feel like you have that footing, that concrete confirmation or reaffirmation that the Father is with you, and that the Father, whatever He's told you, from the beginnings of time, is true. But it is, okay? And continue to stand on those things, all right? Continue to believe that the same Father who did it for Adam in the garden, who did it for Abram, who did it for Noah, who did it for Shem, who did it for Israel, who did it for Judah, who did it for those people, will do it for you. All right, will do it for us and what we need. All right, so that's what I got for you guys tonight. First Chronicles chapters 1 through 9. We'll be meeting again Sunday for weekly Bible study, 8 p.m. on my YouTube channel. So feel free to subscribe, like, and comment, do all that type of stuff. We'll be looking at chapters 10 on to the end on Sunday. So go ahead and get a good read of First Chronicles in, because it's really going over a lot of things that we've already discussed. And so we'll kind of move through it a little bit quicker. And so thank you guys so much for joining us. I love you. I appreciate you. I don't take it lightly that you give this time to myself and also to what the Father's desires to do through me. And so I appreciate you for that. But more important than me loving you, the Father loves you. Okay? Let Him love you. Start before you're ready, and don't stop. I'll see you guys next time.